All right, welcome everyone. I see we have a core group today, not the huge numbers that we usually get, I think because of spring break and other things going on, but most of the people on today are connected with the Adult Ed Consortia rather than their district. So that's good to see. And so let's move it on in. I'm going to try to limit how much I say because we want to get to your questions. And maybe you can stump Veronica, Holly, and Mandalee with some NOVA type questions. We'll see. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the CFAD, the allocations, the COLA, Brown Act, public meetings, all in maybe 5-10 minutes. Then I'll turn it over to Veronica to demo how to submit your CFAD and then how to process an allocation amendment. And then in the NOVA basic and reminder, she'll try to cover some things that have come up recently and other things that the TAP staff have noticed they get calls on for technical assistance. And then we'll leave a lot of time at the end for additional questions and discussion. So next slide, please. So just to go over the CFAD is important. This is a public decision making on allocations for the next school year. The public meetings are called out in legislation, so you have to follow that according to the ed code that governs CAEP. During that time, your consortia can change its fiscal structure. So there's two types. As you know, there's a fiscal agent and there's direct funded. So the CFAD is the chance for the consortia to get together and their members and decide what fiscal structure they're going to be using and certify that for the upcoming year. There's also at this time a chance to determine whether a member, and we'll go over the ed code on this, but whether a member should be funded or not, meaning is that member in good standing, are they an ineffective member? So they didn't meet some of the requirements. And so that's also an activity that can happen during the CFAD process. And then this also gives the state CAEP office the ability to set up statewide disbursements of CAEP funding and meet the statute requirements for disbursement of funds. And we are hoping to get those funds out starting in August. And then it also provides funding if we get that money out in August to local members in time for fall classes. So we're not, shorting districts funding and cash flow issues. So we're trying to avoid that this year as we have tried to avoid it the last few years. So next slide, please. So as you know, CFADs are due May 2nd. That's a Sunday. So technically they're due the next day on Monday, May 3rd. And then the governor's budget is approved usually by July 1st. And then the funds are released in August in 11 installments. Now this, we could have a little hiccup if the May revise, there's an addition or a reduction. We've had that happen like last year and maybe the year before where we had to do a revised CFAD and that got a little confusing, but everybody did that and they were submitted by June 30th. So we're going to see by middle of May, there is going to be a revise, and then we launch the revised CFAD process, which is unfortunate, but could be fortunate if it's more money, unfortunate if it's less money, just given the fact that there's revenue coming in, that they just announced a higher amount of revenue than what projected. I'm hoping there's not a reduction in funds. Maybe there's an increase. Maybe they're feeling generous, and the fact that all our students have been adversely affected by the pandemic, maybe they're going to give us a break. We'll see. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the COLAs, as you know, we received an $8.1 million COLA. It's was 1.5%, but when they shaved off the hundreds, it's really 1.4999 all the way out. So if you are trying to use a percentage to calculate how much each member gets, you can use that percentage, or you can just use the percentage that they got from the allocation of funds last year, and they get the same percentage, just the amount upticked a little bit. All members are eligible for COLAs, which means a member that's in good standing and is not an ineffective member. And the consortia cannot vote to exclude or prevent a member in good standing from receiving a COLA, provided that the member received funding in the prior year, because the Ed Code states you have to get the same amount as you did in the prior year. And so with the COLA, that would be the same percentage. So next slide, please. So here's, just wanted to cite that Ed Code 84914, where you can decrease or reduce a member's allocation. It would have to be for cause. And so there's 3 items that you can reduce a member's funding for. And as you can see, ABC, 1, the member no longer wishes to provide services consistent with the adult ed plan. The member cannot provide services that address the needs identified in the adult ed plan, or the member has been consistently ineffective in providing services that address the needs identified in the plan, and reasonable interventions have not resulted in improvements. So next year, starting July 1, next program year, we're going to be a little more intentional about ineffective member and member effectiveness, tracking it a little closer, and working with the consortia and their members, providing that reasonable intervention. And then maybe the member turns themselves around and becomes more effective. If not, then we would allow the consortia to reduce their funds. So more to follow on that. We'll be having probably a webinar on that, maybe late May or June, on consortia effectiveness and the changes coming out for next program year. So next slide, please. Okay, and then just to reiterate, public meetings, they're still enforceable, but the governor did suspend the in-person. We put that link down there, so you can go to that executive notice. I haven't heard of any changes. You might hear before I do, because your local district is on top of those public meetings. So just make sure when you're setting up your public meetings that you're aware of any changes, and probably your legal counsel or your district would know the most current information. So next slide, please. And then just a quick couple of FAQs. Can I wait until June to file my CFAD? No, you can't. We understand that it may be tough to schedule public meetings, but any late filing will delay the process of CAEP funding for 21-22. Question, what if my consortia has a fiscal agent? Do I have to submit my CFAD by May 2nd? Yes, we still need the allocation amounts and justification if changed on the fiscal structure, verification of the fiscal structure, and confirmation that there was a public process for decision making. So we want to make sure that all the consortia certify their CFAD by that May date. Okay, next slide, please. What if a consortia or my consortia wants to hold money in a consortia pot for projects? Now, we have several consortia in the state that like doing this, and we always advise them, because of Ed Code, we would advise you to create your project pot after the CFAD and use the allocation amendment process. And the reason being is that if you put all this money in one member's account and you do it through the CFAD, then that member gets the same amount the following year. Let's say there's a change. We had one instance where the member said, I don't remember being the consortia pot. That's all my money, and we're going to use it for our purposes. So that's probably an anomaly, but you just have to be careful with that. So it's always good to move money around after the CFAD using the allocation amendment process. That way it doesn't rebench that allocation amount. and you can do that throughout the year. But so we'll give a demo of that a little bit later in the presentation today. And then I have a new member. How will they receive funding? So the answer is, if a consortium wants to fund new members that have no prior year funding, they should use an allocation amendment process after the CFAD is submitted. I know it's not the best way, and the way the legislation is set up, it really prevents us from expanding like that. And so until they fix that, I mean, there could be other ways, like if a member chooses not to provide services or doesn't want the COLA and provide services related to it, that would go back to that ed code, that number A or letter A. The member does not wish to provide services. So there's some ways you could work around that, but you have to be careful. And I would consult TAP and myself in doing that, just so you don't have unintended consequences. So next slide, please. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Veronica, and I will take a look at the chat while Veronica's doing the demo to see if there's any questions. Thank you.
Neil, do you want to, there's just one question from Kirsten. Do you want to address that now?
Sure. How will effectiveness be tracked, and when will the criteria be shared with consortia? So we have a memo drawn up. We're working on a draft tracking log. We're working with CASAS on kind of a reporting process for TOPS Pro as far as the DIR. So once those all come together, we're hoping by late May, June, that we'll do a webinar kind of explaining that process. They won't go into effect until July 1. And so, you know, the way it'll work, just in a nutshell, is if you're late on a deliverable, you'll get a reminder. And then if you're still late after the reminder, we'll reach out to the consortia lead. And then if the consortia lead needs technical assistance, we'll provide that member or the consortia technical assistance. If that still doesn't work, then it gets referred to the state, and the state makes that decision whether that member has been effective or not, meaning the deliverables. And then they will notify the consortia that, you know, ineffective member, and you can reallocate for reduce funds if you choose so. And then the state will keep track of which members and which consortia have members that are ineffective. So that's just in a nutshell. We'll have a webinar to explain it more. So hopefully that answers your question, Kirsten. Tim said, regarding effectiveness, has anything been finalized about 15% carryover that members need to be aware of? I know there's a proposed bill, but it's proposed, so can't really comment on proposed legislation, but we are working with the NOVA programmers to have a carryover trigger. And then once the legislation or the process works itself through, we'll finalize what that trigger is, whether it's 15% or another amount. But there will be some type of carryover trigger. We're just kind of working on what percentage that will be. And then Kelly says, how will data effectiveness for non-credit? So Kelly, when you certify the CFAD, there's 21 assurances that you certify to. All the members that certify their CFAD are certifying to those 21 assurances. And the assurances are related to, you know, turning in your report, certifying your Q1, your expenditure report, submitting your work plan and budget, submitting your 3-year plan, submitting your annual plan, those kind of things. So there's rather kind of generic across the board deliverables related to planning and fiscal reporting that all consortia members and consortias have to follow. And so we'll lay that out for you when we do the training. So hopefully that makes sense. And so for colleges, they don't have to worry about the data reporting because it's submitted with your semester data. So the costs of reporting that I'm referring to is specific to K-12 and county offices that report through TE, because that's a more manual process that relies on the submission of the DIR. So just for those reporting deliverables related to student data, it's easier for the community colleges because that's part of their process. But for the K-12s and county office, they do have to submit that DIR and do some process steps in order to get that submitted. So we'll provide more training on that as it becomes available. And then Autumn, we'll get to the allocation amendment process. Let's wait until we get there, and we'll talk about an easier way to shift funds between members after the CFAD. So with that, I'll turn it over to Veronica.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen now and go into Nova. So everyone should see the Nova application in the safe environment and should be seeing Allen Hancock Consortium. Is everyone seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so this is the CFAD, but actually I want to back up a little bit because we've had questions about why there is a negative. Oh, it won't allow me to see it. We've had questions about the negative that, oh yeah, you will only see it when it's when it has been submitted. So let me go to another consortia just so everyone is able to see this. One second while my computer is thinking. Okay, so it's taking a little bit longer than, oh, here we go. So I'm going to show you a fake submitted CFAD. So here's for Contra Costa. And so here you see the CFAD from 2019 to 2020 to 21, and 21 to 22. And so at the bottom, you see this negative total remaining. And so we have received questions about why there is still a negative total remaining from prior years. And so we just want to remind everyone that last year we went through 2 cycles of allocation amendment updates after the May revise. So at the May revise, we were looking at a reduction in funding across the state. And so each consortium completed an allocation amendment to account for that decrease in funding. And then by July 1, we were leveled out from the prior year funding. And so each consortia had to complete an allocation amendment to adjust for that, the governor's signed budget. And so as you all know, the CFAD, once we complete it, so once it's submitted and certified by the May 2nd deadline, we are unable to make any changes to the CFAD. And so therefore, each of those occurrences where we had to make changes to the allocations, we completed them within the allocation amendment section. And so you will always see this negative number here, even up through the expiration of the funding. So when this funding expires, then of course you'll no longer see it, but it will remain here. So don't be alarmed when you see this, when you come to complete your CFAD. It's not that you didn't take care of anything or something was missing, etc. It's just that it was because we can only complete the CFAD once, it was left over after the May revise. So I just want to touch on that just so everyone's aware and no one's alarmed when they go to complete their CFAD. And so now I'm going to go back to Allen Hancock to do the actual demonstration. And hopefully my computer doesn't take too long. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Allen Hancock and open up their CFAD and click on the CFAD, so Fiscal Declaration. So here is where the consortia is identifying whether or not they're going to be remain direct funded or if they're going to change for the 2021-22 program year. So here for Allen and Hancock, they are direct funded, and then it asks, do you plan to continue with this selection for 2020-2022? And so we're going to go yes. And then here you have a message up here that says that your consortium has decided to stay direct funded. And if this was not intentional, you can click here to undo. And then it'll take you back to the previous screen where you will be able to change from direct funded to fiscal agent. And so your disbursement method is labeled here, and then we have a narrative. So we're asking, please provide a narrative justifying how the plan allocations are consistent with the annual adult education plan based on your 3-year plan. And so this answer should be in 3,500 characters or fewer. So here you would just type in your narrative. So I'm just going to put in a simple sentence just to get us through the process. Something simple to get us through, and then I'm going to mark no changes because in theory, there were no changes to the disbursement method here. So we decided to remain direct funded. So there were no changes here. So click no changes, and then we'll go next. Now here is where your member agencies and certifiers are located. So here is where for each of your member agencies, the member representatives that are associated with this agency is located here. Here is also the one opportunity within the year to be able to change whether a member is allocated funds or non-allocated and just a voting member only. So in prior years, there was discrepancy going back and forth about if a particular member was not allocated, voting only versus allocated. There were in between, like the program year, we will receive requests to change the status, and we can only do this during the CFAD process. So as you approach the CFAD process, please make sure that you have determined for the program year, which is 2021 through 2022, if your member is going to be non-allocated voting member only, or they're going to be an allocated member. And remember, allocated members are required to complete all of the CAEP deliverables in NOVA versus a non-allocated member. They are only approvers of like the CFAD being submitted, or if an allocation amendment was processed, they approve those types of deliverables, but they do not have to complete an expenditure report, a budget and work plan, etc. So just make sure that everyone's clear on that when you come to this process, because we are unable to change it midway through the program year. And then you can also here add a certifier. And so here is where you can add members. And so if they are an existing NOVA user, you would just type in their name or email and search for them. If they are not an existing NOVA user, for example, they just came on board to the agency or the college district, then you could invite them here by putting in their name, so first name, last name, and their work email, and they will receive an invitation from NOVA asking them to create a password so that they'll have access to the NOVA account. They will also be a part of this particular agency. So I'm going to go cancel here, and I'll go cancel here. And so you are able to also add a new agency here. So for the upcoming program year, if you're bringing on a new agency, then you can add them here. At first, we were only able to do this during this time, during the CFAD process, but now you're able to add agencies throughout the year. But and then if you were to give them funding, then you can complete an allocation amendment to give them funding. So if you have new members here, you can add them here as well by just clicking on the button. You'll type their member type. So whether they are a district, a college, a COE, an ROC/P, elementary school district, unified, so on and so forth. And then you can type the member institution name here. And then again, you're gonna say whether or not they are an allocated member or non-allocated voting member only. So that's to add this here. And I'm just gonna type in something just to get me through this window. And remember, this is all fake data. It's not impacting Allen Hancock anyway. So now I'm going to go next because everything here is correct. One thing that I also would like to point out that we have seen come up in the past couple of weeks is NOVA is our first, I guess, reference when it comes to us contacting consortia leads, as well as member representatives, fiscal context, etc. And we have noticed that the NOVA information is no longer accurate. So for example, we contacted the consortium and included the consortium lead, a member representative, and a fiscal contact. And we were told that the fiscal contact, for example, is no longer a part of the agency and or consortium. And so we want to make sure that, especially as you're moving into the next program year, that you are updating this information as much as possible. Because whenever we send out communication, for example, from the CAEP office, and it's going to consortia leads as well as member representatives and potentially fiscal contacts, we want to make sure that we're reaching everyone. So please make sure that your contact information for all of your member representatives is correct. And if someone is no longer with the agency or with the consortium, please remove them from your agency information so that when we contact everyone, we are contacting the appropriate people. And so I'm going to go next here. And member allocation. So here is where I talked about you will see this negative expenditure here, or excuse me, negative total remaining here, because again, we only complete the CFAD once, and this was after the May revise. So here you're just going to put in your allocations per member agency. And what you are getting towards is this is your total CAEP funds, and you want your total remaining to be 0. So in order to complete this process, the total remaining has to be 0. So you want to make sure that you are allocating the appropriate amount of money so that that total remaining is 0, or you will not be able to complete the CFAD. So here I am going to type in the allocations for Allen Hancock. And if I type in the allocation from last year only, then I will not be accounting for the COLA. So here, if I were to just give them the same amount of monies as they received last year without accounting for the COLA, I have a negative total remaining here of $13,380. So I want to make sure that I am accounting for the COLA when I am putting in the allocations per member agency. And so just for the sake of this exercise, I'm not going to divide the COLA as it should be, but I'm just going to give all the COLA to one member district. Again, this is not a real, I'm not submitting this for them. So if I give all the extra money to one agency, I'm not messing anyone up. So I'm just doing a little quick math. So I am going to give Allen Hancock $756,830. Oh, hold on, I did that wrong. Okay, so I have my negative 13. One second. Okay, so this is actually going to be less than. So their allocation is actually going to be 730,070. And then we'll get to the total remaining of the $1,718,846,000. So when you are completing your allocations, just make sure that you're completing it by the total allocation from that spreadsheet that was sent out with the preliminary allocations, I believe back in late February, and just make sure that you are accounting for the COLA when you complete that. So I'm going to go next here. And then here is where you review everything that has been submitted. So here is just a summary, and you're in draft status now. Consortium name, the funding channel, since there were no changes. Here is the simple narrative that I put in, and then I checked that there were no changes. And then here are the allocations that were allotted for each of the member agencies. We are down to total remaining of 0. And then in the member agencies, There are only still 2 member agencies for Allen Hancock. We didn't add any additional member agencies. And your certification and assurances. So here are the assurances that when you're looking at member effectiveness, here are all of the assurances that each member will adhere to through the 2021-2022 program year. These are all of the things that they say that they will do, especially when it comes to reporting requirements and making sure that they are submitting their reports, each of the reports that are supposed to be submitted. So once all of this is previewed, then you just go to submit, and then this box will come up. You are able to type in comments if there are any for your member representatives prior to them either approving or rejecting the CFAD. And if there are no comments, you could just go okay. And the CFAD will be submitted. And once the CFAD is submitted, each member representative will receive an email from the NOVA system to them, letting them know that the primary contact has completed the CFAD and it is awaiting their approval, or if they choose to reject for whatever reason, they have the opportunity to do so. Now, if you are coming close, let's say to the May 2nd deadline, and your member representatives have not submitted the CFAD, please send them a reminder. You can send them a reminder from your own communication, but what we would not want is for you to forward an email from the NOVA system to them, because if they click on approve or reject from that email that you forwarded to them, then they will be submitting, let's say on your behalf, like under your name, under your credentials. So you want to make sure if you send them a reminder to come into the system and to complete it from the system, send them a reminder from here, because when they receive the reminder, they're going to log in under their own credentials. And when they sign it, it will be signed under their name and not yours. So that's another tip that we wanted to share with you all. So that is the CFAD in a nutshell. I see the chat is highlighted.
Veronica,
So
we did have one question that hasn't been answered from Emma. She said, any minimum or maximum number of certifiers you recommend per agency in NOVA?
certifiers. So how NOVA works is you can have as many member representatives for the member agencies as you would like. There has to be at least one. But just as it works for the primary contact, the first listed member representative is the person who is the approver for that particular member agency. So whomever you want to approve for example, the CFAD, then that's the person that will be listed first. But you can have as many member representatives as you would like. There is no max limit, but there's only one approver per member agency. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. You are welcome. All right, anything else with the CFAD process?
No, I'm just handling a couple of questions, but nothing on the CFAD. Oh, Kathy said, how do you move certifiers to the top spot?
Okay, so that process, it's a little clunky. You have to basically remove all of the member representatives above the person who you want to be the certifier or the approver. So for example, if you have 5 member representatives listed for a particular agency, but the 5th member representative that's listed is the person that you want to be the approver or the certifier, you would have to remove the 4 top people, and the 5th person will now move to the first person or the first line, and then you'll have to add those people back into, you have to add them back into the the agency. All right, you're welcome. Okay, so if there's nothing left with this process, do you want to move on to allocation amendment, or is there anything you'd like to cover here, Neil?
No, you're good.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll go on to the allocation amendment process, and I know we have some questions that we want to answer there. So I'll start with the allocation amendment. So it's I believe the third section, the third section on the consortium details page. And so here it is where it says allocations, and each year where there are funds available appear in the allocation section. And so you, in theory, are able to complete an allocation amendment on any available funds, any fund years that are available to you. So if I wanted to move funds from, let's say I had some carryover funding that I know I will not be able to spend before the expiration of the 2018-19 funds, although we've passed that, but in theory, if I wanted to move funding that I knew I wasn't able to spend, I would start an allocation amendment on that particular program year. So you want to make sure that the allocation amendment that you are submitting aligns with the funding year for the available funds. So let's just say 2020-21, I decide that I want to complete an allocation amendment, or it's past the May 2nd CFAD deadline, and according to the May revise, we have received additional funding. So we will come here to complete the allocation amendment to account for the increase, because we cannot complete a CFAD another CFAD once the CFAD is submitted. So you will start the amendment here, and you'll receive a message that says you would need to follow the workflow steps, and once submitted, the changes will need to be approved by member representatives. So I understand that. I'm going to continue. And then here, again, here is where you see your current agencies and certifiers. And then you also have the opportunity to add a new member agency here. So remember that moving forward. But here, you are not able to change the status of your agencies and certifiers. So you are not able to change them from a funded member to an allocated member to a non-allocated voting member only. You can only do that during the CFAD process. So I don't have any changes to my agencies and certifiers. So I'm going to move forward with member allocations. And here are the current allocations for the 2020-21 program year for Allen Hancock and Lompoc Unified. So let's say Allen Hancock Joint CCD wants to give Lompoc Unified $10,000 for the 2020-21 program year. So here I will account for that transaction where I'm going to decrease Allen Hancock by $10,000. So instead of them having an allocation of $726,806, they will now have an allocation of $716,806. And then Lompoc, I'm going to increase their allocation to $1,066,640. So we will do that here. Excuse me, it's 976,000. Sorry, I thought it was 100,000. So 976,000. And so here you can see I decreased Allen Hancock Joint CCD by 10,000, and I'm going to increase Lompoc Unified by $10,000. And here the total allocated to members is the same as the total CEP funds, and there are total remaining is 0. So that is going to allow us to move forward. And we're going to go to the preview section here. And so here is just a preview. This information is imported from the CFAD section. So it's letting us know, of course, our consortium name, we are direct funded. The justification during the CFAD last year was not completed, but they did provide a narrative and there were no changes. And then we see the actual transaction here. And our member agencies are listed here. And then again, the certification and assurances. Certification and assurances will be reviewed in theory each time a transaction such as a CFAD, the allocation amendment, the budget and work plan. Each time any of those tasks are completed, you will see the assurances. So the assurances for membership and decision-making, public meetings, and reporting requirements. And so now we're going to hit submit. Their last allocation amendment took place on July 7, 2020. So that's just something letting you know that an allocation amendment took place during that time. But once you hit submit, you can submit here. It's going to ask you if you would like to put any comments, then you press OK. Now the member representatives will be notified that this allocation amendment has been completed, and they can either approve or reject the allocation amendment. If they decide to reject the allocation amendment, the consortium has to come back together to either agree on new amounts and increase or change the amounts at least by $1, or they can cancel the allocation amendment altogether. And again, with this, you are awaiting approval. If some time has passed and your member representative has not completed or approved the allocation amendment or rejected it, you can send a reminder, but please send a reminder from the system so that when they log in, they're signing under their own credentials. And that is an allocation amendment.
So Veronica, we did have a question. How would this differ if I did a prior year like 1920? So Marina says, can you explain the process for an allocation amendment for the 1920 year? Once the amendment is certified, funds have been received by the institution. Do individual members need to arrange for transfer of funds? And I would say if you're, and this is the question that Kirsten had, if you're direct funded, yes, you will have to, cut a check or wire transfer, however your accounting or business office wants to move those funds. It doesn't automatically, magically happen just because you put it in the Nova system. You still have to take that extra step if you're direct funded of moving those funds physically at the local level. If you're a fiscal agent, the fiscal agent has a little more flexibility to move funds around because they're allocating funds on a monthly basis or however those are allocated. I think they have to do it within 45 days of receipt of funds. So they can make those adjustments as the fiscal agent, which is a little different. But Veronica, if you just want to show them how to do a prior year, it's probably the same thing, but maybe there's some nuances to show people.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the same process. You would just go to the prior year and start the amendment on the prior year. So I would start the amendment here, but it's the same process in terms of transferring the funds and completing the transaction for approval.
Okay, and then has anybody, I'm going to just ask this to the group that's on the line. If you're direct funded, have you figured out an easy way to move money around locally? Like Kirsten and Marina are asking, and I think it was Autumn as well. What's the easiest way if you're a direct funded member to move money to another member if you put it in Nova as an allocation amendment? Does someone walk a check down to that other district? Is there a wire transfer? If anybody has anything to share, please put it in the chat. Thank you. I think that's it on questions, Veronica, so far. Oh, Mitch said, invoicing the agency, giving up the money, and attach the board agenda item and approve minutes for documentation with the business offices. Thank you, Mitch, for sharing that. And Peggy seconded that. So that seems to be a process that several consortia are using. I don't know, Veronica, if you and the TAP team have heard anything on this topic on allocation amendments at the local level for direct funded consortia.
Right, yeah, nothing different from what's being stated in the chat.
Okay, and Jody said they did a wire transfer, but it's cumbersome, time consuming because of board approvals. And Tim also said it's not easy. It was an invoice and a lot of follow-up. So, and then Kathy pointed out there is a process in the fiscal guidebook on page 22, but I'm sure it's no less easier. And Carol says districts send a check to the member based on the consortia decision in agreement with the district and consortia board approval. So it sounds like the process is very similar throughout the consortia, but sometimes it's clunky getting those board approvals and making this work. Seems like there's no, like Lonzi said, there's no easy way to report a check has been issued for record keeping purposes. So, okay. Veronica, did you want to cover a couple other things that you guys are noticing in the NOVA system related to allocation amendments or just NOVA in general? Was there anything else like tips that you're seeing, or do we want to open it up to see if anybody has any questions?
Yeah, we can definitely open it up to see if anyone has any questions. Other than what we have covered related to the CFAD and the allocation amendment process, that has been it. The only thing that, like I mentioned before, that we would advise you all is to occasionally check the check NOVA for updated contact information. Because like I mentioned, when we are sending communication on behalf of the CAP office, we want to make sure that those communication, especially the important ones that we don't necessarily include in the newsletter, that we are reaching the right people.
Yeah. And Veronica Shannon has a question. She said, so if you did an allocation amendment for 1920, that would reduce their FIFO carryover for that year. And
yes, that's correct. Their available funds would be reduced, and the receiver, so the member agency that's receiving the funds, their carryover would be increased.
Right. And I guess the consortia or the members should check to see where they have that carryover, because at some point in the year, you have 3 years of active funds. And so you got to make sure, like we're just closing out 18-19 right now. So you should make sure all your 18-19 funds are spent before you do a 19-20 allocation amendment, right? I would assume.
Again?
What's that?
Oh, were you asking me the question?
Oh, I was just confirming that with you.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. So, I mean, that doesn't work well right now because we're kind of closed out on 18-19. So you should be trying to move that 19-20 if you did have carryover. Kathy said, if we did an amendment during the year to add funds to an agency, do we want these funds to be part of their ongoing allocation? Do we need another consortia approval? So they would want to, Kathy, are you saying, do you want to make them kind of like a permanent status and make them like a bona fide member that gets the same amount of funding every year? If they were initially a new member and now they're going to get kind of like the same prior year? I'm trying to understand the question. I don't know, Veronica, do you see the question? Maybe you have a better understanding of it.
I'm going over the question now.
Okay. So I'm thinking this might be just any member.
Yeah, it sounded like it's, if they want the funds to be a part of their ongoing allocation, they would actually make sure that the allotted amount is a part of the CFAD. If I'm reading this correctly.
Yeah, and Kathy added, it's not a new member. However, we added funds for a job developer to 2 of our members, and we want these funds to be ongoing. So how do they make a allocation amendment permanent, I guess is the question.
Right, so that's the CFAD. They would have to, as Shannon has alluded to, that they would have to approve it at the CFAD process so that next year when they complete the CFAD, the member would be receiving the base allocation, the increase from the prior year.
Which makes it, yeah, which makes it tricky because you get no less than what you did in the prior year. And so that's how some consortia have kind of played around with the COLA. And so technically you could say a member says, I don't want the COLA. I'm planning not to use this COLA for additional services and then give it to somebody else. I guess I've heard of some consortia getting it around it by that if they're willing to give up their COLA. I don't know, it's a little clunky too. But I think you could work through that, Kathy, of making that permanent as long as the rest of your members are on board with that. But if you do have some members that don't want to give up those funds, or if there's a misunderstanding, it might be difficult to add those permanently. I think Ivan had a question, or just the same. He says, I think the important point to keep in mind in relationship to what Neil said is that any funds that are transferred from previous years have the same expiration dates as the transferred funds. So I think what Ivan's saying is make sure accounting. So if you do, like Veronica's showing a 1920 allocation amendment, that your accounting office or your business office is actually sending that check over from that account. Is that, I think that's what Ivan's saying. I never thought of that way, but accounting does track it by funding year. So it sounds like it would be important to make sure they draw from the right account. And I think that's what Ivan's saying. Because I could see where they could just draw from the most recent allocation and kind of mess things up. Shannon says, I think you would just vote on the approval at the next CFAD. Yeah. The only thing you can't do is vote somebody out from getting their funding unless they're an ineffective member. So for COLAs, and I don't know if I'm confusing the issue, but and then Kathy said there were actually from a member that no longer wanted to continue offering the service. They became a non-vendor. Okay, so that makes sense. That aligns with Ed Code, Kathy, and so gives you the flexibility to do those kind of things. So that's good. And then Emma says, Neil, can we make sure the meeting minutes are clear on one-time allocation versus ongoing allocation? So Emma, I mean, Veronica, what's the difference between a one-time allocation and an ongoing allocation? I'm a little confused by that.
Right, so how I understand a one-time allocation is kind of like the transaction that I completed. When you complete an allocation amendment, in theory, that's just a one-time transaction. It's not going to be recorded next year, and the baseline allocations for the members will not be changed based on an allocation amendment. However, if the allocations change in the CFAD, then that's changing the baseline allocation moving forward for each of the members. Not for each of the members, but for the member that their allocation changed in the CFAD. Moving forward, their baseline allocation will now become that new allocation, and vice versa if there was a decrease.
Right. So technically, we don't want to use the term ongoing allocation. We want to use maybe changing their
baseline.
Yeah, their baseline or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then Marina offered, we are working with our business department to issue a check and match the NOVA FIFO numbers. Not yet clear on how this will be done at the business office. So a little clunky there with direct funded members. And then Ivan just clarified, what I mean is that we have 3 years to use the funds. So if funds are transferred from a previous year, like 1920, those transfers fund would expire in 22-23. Right. So Ivan, that is right. But if we do get this carryover legislation that's been proposed, that might change that 3-year timeline, and we might have a shorter timeline. So we'll see what happens on that. So stay tuned. We'll know more over the next few months as proposed bills get acted upon or move forward. Actually, that bill process really extends into September. So the real drop dead date is kind of like at the end of September. So that carryover issue might linger over the summer, unfortunately. All right, and then Branca said, Veronica is correct in interpreting it that way. In CAREC, we move funds between members through multiple allocation amendments within the year. We have clear documentation of processes, and we record that in our business meeting minutes. The CFAD is more steady base each year. Okay. So we still have a few more, we have about 5 more minutes. If anybody has any other topics to bring up. A lot of good sharing in the chat. I'm grateful for those who are sharing what's happening and asking questions. And so Neil, you mentioned September. I thought 1920 expires in December 20. So what I mentioned about in September is there's a proposed bill to set forth a carryover trigger. And so we won't know until the end of September if that bill gets signed by the governor. And then it would probably go into effect the following year. We'd have to look at the wording of the bill to see when it goes into effect. So just stay tuned. And the bill number, let me look that up, Lonzy. Give me a second. And it's proposed, so it's difficult to find. Let's see, where am I gonna find this? 1 second, please. Put me on the spot there. I think I found it. It's Assembly Bill 1491. And let's see if I can find the link. I'll put it in the chat if it can come up. Here it is. And I will put this in the chat. Now remember, this is proposed. So that doesn't mean it's going to be passed as is. It's all right, Lonzy. I think we needed to have this discussion anyway. All right. And then Peggy, we're kind of out of time. If you want to work directly with Holly and Veronica Amandali.
Peggy, we'd be happy to set up a Zoom right following this. I can jump on Zoom with you.
Okay, and make sure before we shut down that everybody, if you were interested in that proposed bill, take a look at it, download it now before we close down. So, and so since we're out of time, we'll wrap there. And if you didn't get a chance to download that, you can always contact TAP and they can send you that. But don't really have any comment on proposed legislation. So, and there's an evaluation from Holly there. And Veronica, any closing thoughts, comments?
Yes, so as Neil had mentioned, or Holly as well, if anyone needs any assistance, especially with the CFAD or completing an allocation amendment, any of the NOVA deliverables, definitely contact us via email or submit a support request. And as Holly will be doing with Peggy, we are happy to jump on Zoom with you all to do a live demonstration in NOVA. Sometimes it's helpful to talk through things and see them on screen versus communicating back and forth via email. So we are more than happy to provide that assistance to you. And there are 3 of us who can do that. So we are more than available. We did post the evaluation link, so definitely complete that evaluation. And let Neil and I know what you thought about today's CFAD update as well as office hour. And if there's any other areas that you think that we should be covering as we move into the program year, we have quite a few things coming out that we will be communicating with you all as it relates to preparing for the next 3-year plan. Our training opportunities. We'll be introducing the CAEP state priorities and how 3-year plans, annual plans, and programs can align to these state priorities. It's a new initiative for us, so we'll definitely be communicating that. And again, a lot of training and great opportunities for the 3-year plan. We do have a host of webinars that are set up from CASAS, WestEd, and we'll be rolling out the CAEP State Priority webinars. So definitely check the registration page and register for all of our upcoming events and convenings. And we will be in communication with you all. Check out the newsletter. That's where we communicate most things. But again, make sure the contact information in NOVA is up to date so that we can make sure we're reaching the right people. And that is all that I have.
All right, well, thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Holly and Mandalee, and thank you to all the participants today. We appreciate you working through this on with us on this and sharing a lot of good information. So we look forward to the next webinar. And for those of you that are taking time off next week for your spring break, please enjoy your time off. And with that, I'll leave it with Tap to close it out.
Have a great rest of your afternoon.